Okay, sorry for that pause. I forgot to start the camera right away. So all that we currently miss for the record is just a roll call. Um, so we'll go through the report. So on your first page, you'll have the summary analysis. And if you remember from the prior years, the summary analysis really kind of breaks down the calculation of how Measure S. And just again to kind of go over that the overall, the committee, the purpose of Measure S is for a supplement, not a supplant. So there is a calculation in the formulation that you'll see in the first page that kind of goes through that exercise to make sure that you're not reducing services beyond a certain point, and that it's consistently growing and things of that nature. So we'll go through the formulation. So for this public safety actual expenditures for the year, and this is actual, 8.7 for total safety, and we'll go back into the support what the numbers come from in the later sheets. Total general fund actual expenditures was 13%, so that brings me a calculation of 64.91% allocated directly for safety expenditures, fire and PD. So with the resolution that was passed, for the budget size that we currently have of over 13 million for that budget year, you need to run a calculation of a minimum of 60%. As you can see from the calculations, we've hit 64. Therefore, you meet the threshold to be able to do the supplement to the general fund. Dollars required to spend for public safety before Measure S was considered for the supplement. As you can see, we've surpassed it greatly. We spent 8.0 million with a variance between the two of 662,000. The amount available for transfer from Measure S and for expenditures paid, 1.2. What was actually transferred from Measure S, direct expenditures out of Measure S, is 1.4. There is a footnote that you see at the bottom that's giving you a slight difference, and we'll go into that footnote number a little bit different or into a little more detail when you get into your transfers. So that'll come back to the next pages. So general fund expenditures in essence, Measure S transfers and minimum percentage required, 547,000. The balance of the Measure S fund of the audited period for June 2018, 546,228,000. Any questions before we go into the detail of what this report? No? Okay. So the next page going on is your summary for your revenue expenditures for the general fund. This is the amounts for the adopted budget. So you can look through that formulation and see those numbers will all tie back into your first sheets. And that's how we kind of run that formulation, again, for the budgeted amounts and what they're supposed to be. The next page after that is the actual for the fiscal year of 18-19. And I misstated that comment at the bottom of page number 1. Actually, it says, where did I see it? Yeah, so it says balance as a Measure S for June 30, 2018. That should be 19. So that's just a correction on the report. Everything else says 18-19. So again, we are doing the fiscal year for 18-19 only. This is the final report that we'll go through that has to be actually the board member, the chairman, our committee will go back to council and approve the report, the document itself. So going back to the total expenditures for the general fund, you can see me running the calculations. The highlighted box totals up to the 64%. Going on to the next reports, you'll see the balance sheet and the financial statements. You can see that the reserve balance is at the same amount that was stated earlier in the report, 546,282 or 28. I'll go ahead and give you a moment to look over the financials. If you have any questions before I move on, just let me know. So just to give you a kind of a highlights of the fund balance itself, or for the balance sheet, just your overall, you have a revenue, or you have a due from other governments. That's just a receivable for 50% of our allocation that we receive in July. A large component of the Measure S itself in the financial statements. This is an adopted budget. The overall, you can see, is going through the year. We are pretty consistent with our overall budgeting. We did take a negative impact of 154,000, but that will go back into the transfer that we're going to discuss in the next sheet. 194, sorry. You'll see that at the very bottom. So going on, we'll go into the next page. You'll see the total transfers for the fiscal year. You do have the 1.2 2 that is budgeted to supplement into the general fund. And you also have 100 or 215,000 that was approved by council to transfer to the police station capital improvement project. And that was actually done in April 15, 2019. The next sheet that we'll go into is, sure.
Actually, it's under directly with the fire department, so it looks like on fire administration,
Mm-hmm.
looking at professional services where the budget is zero, and it looks like we spent over $125,000.
Mm-hmm. So what that transaction there was the fire department. They were going through a process of actually trying to build a new one, and that item was actually allocated to professional service because the project did not go forward.
So what expenditures do we have for a new fire department that is not coming to fruition that are over $125,000?
There was we had some development of plans. That was probably the bulk of it. We also had some testing, I believe.
Plans development, there were multiple tests and inspections that were done prior to the plan development before, which most of that was all done prior to us putting a hold on the project, stopping the project.
So when do plans need to be refreshed, testing, certifications expired? I guess the issue is I have an issue spending over $100,000 on a project that we're not going to see everything come to fruition.
Well, the project you're looking at now, or for was in this scope, was a remodel. They are assessing the overall logistics of the city, whether a new build in a different location would actually be better.
So for $126,000 change in planning, what was the cost of the about the ballpark?
It was overall, throughout the long term, it was a
5?
little over, well, long term, when you anticipate finance and everything, I believe it was over 8 million.
Yeah, with the financing.
With the
and everything,
financing,
it
but
will
I
be.
believe it was a 30-year finance, and the overall cost with that was going to be over 8 million. Without that, I believe it was just under 5 million.
No, I think that's a lot of money for a project that we're not going to do. And then, so supplies, there's a budget of 7,000, but it's over 15,000?
For administration still?
Yeah, I'm still under, right, fire administration, the first line under that supplies.
Yeah, there's.
Budget for 7K and it's over 15.
Yeah, he had an allocation for another 10,000 in his equipment fund that was not utilized. It was pushed into the supplies instead. What happens is we make an allocation depending on what our parameters of an asset would be. So for that account, the 700, 200, you actually can spend only about $5,000 or more on a single item, where there's supplies that he actually needed did not fall within those parameters, so it's shifted into that column.
What was the additional?
And actually, if you go back, if it's the supplies column itself, you'll see it in our other expenditure report that you see here. You'll see the more for the breakdown. It is,
Measure S, equipment expenditures, the breakdown right below that.
yeah, it's 2 more pages back.
So, there's a lot of charges to Cascade Fire right years in, like the last day of the year. What were those expenditures for?
So the first, let's see, 8/27, 2018, those were for wildland helmets.
Let's talk about reallocate Cal Fire expense for
That was that was done 6/22 of 2018. Those were for new fire helmets and shields that go with the helmets.
And so on the next sheet, you'll actually get into the allocation of the Cal car transaction, so you can see that broken down a little bit more. They're not supposed to.
So that's why I'm asking the question. So I get helmets and visors, so how about there was charges, what were all 3 charges? It was 3 separate transactions, so it was their business
Cascade,
on the last day.
12/31, 2018 Cascade, 2,557. That's for one set of turnouts, including taxes. The other two are for one set of turnouts and two sets of turnout boots, structure boots, each.
Okay. Yeah. We'll move on to the next page is basically a copy of all the detail that goes along with our CalCard transactions. I will note that we found a typo for the Home Depot transaction, homedepot.com. It's actually not helmet shields. It's actually supposed to be
The Milwaukee drills,
the Milwaukee drills. It's a couple line items down.
and then the WPSG Incorporated, that's where the helmet shields would go. So they're just basically switched.
So I've got a couple questions as well on CalPERS statements. So on 9/31 and 19, I don't see any other mules listed on here from previous expenditures when I was looking through some past meetings.
Mm-hmm.
We bought pizza for $16.
So it'll all depend on how they do the class. So typically with a class, they'll be paid for the class, a hotel room if necessary, and per diem. What we tend to find out with like this, on a one-day class, they'll just take their Cal card like this, and the class is paid for, and then one meal.
Instead of paying for it out of pocket and submitting reimbursement.
Right.
And then, so on 222, there's 222 and 223 of 19, there's 4 charges for Best Western. Says hotel for training, so one hotel room is 150. Looks like another one is $15, another one is $3, and another one is $35.
That was for, the only thing that we can figure with this, I spoke to our fire marshal, it was his class, and when he did it, there was some error with the card, so he stayed for 2 nights. So we believe that the 150 is one night, and then they charged him, they had problems the second day with the card, and so then they recharged it in increments the way this is lined up. In talking with Tim, that's the only thing we can come up is why they broke the charges down the way they did.
So did he come back with a statement from Best Western with the card?
He did, yeah. They were filed with the
The CalCard.
CalCard charges at the time. Everything was broken down.
It doesn't need to be the next meeting, it seems odd. So the hotel was one, and the numbers are all even, that doesn't make any sense to me for a hotel, I don't feel like the hotel with the numbers, you know what I mean? I know it's a minor charge, but
Sure. We can send you a copy of that transaction from the CalCard record. Any other questions? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and move forward. What you'll see now is all the copies of the actual stubs for the taxes that are coming in on a monthly basis. You can actually take a moment and tie that back into a couple pages prior, where you'll see the details for the Measure S transactions from the state of California coming in. So I'll give you a moment to go ahead and look through that. Which one? I'm sorry, which one?
Dates are 19, but on the, saying 18 on your GL. These are the amounts that tie back, right?
Mm-hmm. 126 and 08.
Is the statement date different than the actual payment date? The date there says 19, but the date here says 18. Is it just a GL thing?
No, I think just the way they issued the payment out. February transaction. $126,000.
See, it's right there. You know, the amounts tie in, it's just, oh, what are these? These the last time?
Those are the posted dates. Those are different ones, though.
Those are
So
different
this one
checks.
is the same one that we got for April.
So these tie in with those, okay.
Correct.
Pardon the interruption.
Does the state make the paper check with ACH or EFT?
ACH. That's just a copy of the stub for the support. I tried to pull a report to make it a little more cleaner, so I'm not having to give you all these stubs to reconcile to, but the bank just doesn't give me that kind of detail. So I can't do a span or a parameter to pull data.
So do we still have, does the city still have outstanding debt with the Quad Bank for the police department?
Yes, we do.
You know what that is off the top of your head?
The total balance? No, I don't. Not at the top of my head. Maybe 200, 300. I want to say it's about 300, actually. We got about 2 more years on it.
We're in 2021?
We're in 20.
No, 2021 we're going into, right?
Yeah.
No, it just barely turned 2020.
No, but I'm talking about the budget year we're going into, 2021. Yeah, we have, I think you said it ends in 2023.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
So is there any discussion with council to pay that debt as opposed to keeping paying APR, not running the police department?
Well, the purpose at this point right now is to make a large purchase. That was the whole purpose, to get us caught up. The second purpose is to be able to have a rolling stock that we can try and take that loan and continue to roll it so that you can do it on a multiple year period. So at this point, given the reserves and things of that nature, you're better off rolling through that. Let the term of it end, and then also you try to do it again at that point in time.
Right, but that's what we said before, there was a transfer of in the six-digit range to, defer deficit with a budgeted police facility. But one of the other concerns I have is there's been no mention, this might be the wrong venue, but there's no mention of new equipment for the police department. So the concern I have, a couple others have brought up lately, is that we're gonna move into a brand new police department, which is long overdue. I don't think that's that at all. So we're gonna move old desks and old computers and old equipment into a state-of-the-art police facility.
There's no mention or conversation at this time that Measure S being utilized for equipment, other than the transfer that was done.
Outside of the police department, where it was just, there was no discussion, it was just done.
No, that action would have to go to council. Further
Right.
Further expenditures will be allocated.
Right.
So
So no discussions about paying off.
we will not be paying that off this time. I still stick with the logic as far as we should continue to roll that stock so we can get larger increments of vehicles in one shot as those vehicles start to date out, and continue to have smaller increments within the budget to try and consistently go forward. Okay.
Yes, of course. Scott Robertson, 1057 Bill Street. So just a theoretical question on the 60% minimum that has to be spent for Measure S. What if, how could that be changed? And would there be a logic in changing that from 60% to another percentage? Could you lower that and would that potentially allow Measure S to pay more expenses?
Well,
Measure S is pretty flush right now.
I mean, you really wouldn't need to lower the amount to transfer more. It's really a budget item. Once you've met that threshold of the 60%, you can transfer further revenue streams.
The logic seems to be we don't want Measure S to just kind of be the fund that everybody goes to pay for public safety. But I've never seen public safety spending less than 60%. Have any of you? I've never seen it.
I think public safety always, I think most municipalities and counties are
It's usually where your largest body source is.
You think, that's my question. Would we have to alter the measure?
I don't necessarily think we have to take a new measure, because I think it's just by resolution at that point of setting new guidelines. I know for sure you'd have to take it as a new measure if you're changing that increment from 0.5% or something like that. But we could look into that research and figure out if it's just a reso change.
So there's no sunset on this?
Correct.
Measure S. So, I mean, if you had to go to different, you would be imperiling Measure S itself. I'm just thinking the 60%, it seems like an artificial number. It doesn't seem like it's ever been used. And we've never really needed to use it because it's never gone below that number in public safety spending.
And what was the point be?
What was the point of having it in the first place? I guess the danger.
To make sure that it doesn't supplant.
Correct. So we're not reducing our,
Supplements, not supplants.
correct.
But you've got this number there, the 60%
I
number.
mean,
That's-
so you needed a number. I wasn't
I wasn't either. No.
No, and I mean, when you look back to like the original, I got the original flyer that was sent out, I mean, there was, supposed to be a certain percentage, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think otherwise the public becomes concerned with the discussion on it. So I don't know that anybody has ever, after the fact, how many years have we been at restaurants?
2007, I think it was actually
Yeah,
passed.
so we're at 13 years in, I don't know that anybody's ever gone back and done a staff study and, said, okay, why, did we drop it to 47%?
Now it seems to be going the other way. It's building up to a pretty good amount at this point, so that it might be time for the committee and the council to look at other
I just don't know
ways of
anybody
using that money.
So
Did-
look at these parameters, see what other communities have done. and-
The level was set at a community meeting, including council and members of the public who came together for an agreement. And that's how the resolution was drafted with those set amounts. And at the time, the city was in the recession. And so we're trying to figure out where you got from to supplement from surplant. So I would say we probably had well over 100 people in that meeting that discussed this.
I don't know that there
And
was
came-
agreement. I know there was a lot of discussion heated both ways, but there wasn't an agreement. The council was the one that ultimately made the decision.
What, they made the final decision, but the members of the community that were here, that was the number that was discussed over some length of time in this meeting, and what had been spent previously and what kind of was a history to make sure that we weren't going to dip down and try to use this as the
Yeah.
sole thing to rescue the city from that time.
If you guys have seen the school district, for instance, not getting off the topic, but they're doing a lot of transfers, a lot of loans to other funds, so that can happen, and fits when this was approved during a really, really tough fiscal time for the city. So it just seems like right now we've evolved past that, and I'm just wondering if there might be time in the future to look at that percentage and see if it could be raised a little bit, or if the allocation of Measure S could be looked at, because there's a lot of money in this fund, and I don't know if there's any plans to step up the spending from Measure S, or if there's plans to use it more as a savings account, or.
Well, the current objective, when we go through our budget process, we look at the full scope. There's always costs going up because you have labor in there as well. But if you look at what we did during the budget process, and it's in the financial statements for the income statement itself, you can see we actually budgeted a shortfall of $22,000. So we're taking a majority of that money is seen as our fiscal stream for the revenue taxes coming in. So we're taking a good amount there. We're not leaving it there to be unutilized throughout that fiscal year. We do have a healthy reserve considering how much revenue stream does come in here. But in the current time, during the budget process, is when we have that conversation of, okay, what does our budget look like? What are we putting in here? A lot of these are pretty much stapled in here already, but we do think about other allocations because you can use the reserve if you want to transfer more. I mean, obviously, you don't want to take and make it a negative balance every single fiscal year because then you'll deplete that reserve as well.
You want to have some in there because we use it efficiently and pay off some of the things that we have.
Well, I think that the two thoughts I have, go back to the police department, right? Every time there's a change, we're paying for that through a change order. And I think we're going to see cost overrun. But number two, and I think, equally important, is at some point, we have to do something with the fire budget. When this whole thing started, I think Myron was at the meeting where we talked about a combined use police and fire training facility that would sit on this, block of land, and I mean, there's asbestos at the PD, we all know that. I would be confident that there's probably asbestos in the firehouses as well. And I think long term, that is going to damage the city, because I think people start making claims against, the entity for asbestos. I mean, how many people, Myron could answer better than how many people could be here, they're coming down from the PD. So I think we're going to incur at some point workers' comp liability, or some kind of, litigation over that. I think the fire department is going to put a step to that.
Well, I think the fire department is getting their normal allocation they would per the measure. So they're utilizing their portion within the fiscal year.
That, but the original language that went out in the flyer talked about the fire department. And we've not done
And they
it.
do get their allocations, so.
Yeah, I remember that too. I've used
Right.
up my 3 minutes, but I remember when we supported that Metro Res, it was for a joint police and
Just
fire
like the
station.
PD had to knock down double wide trailers, the fire department would too, and at some point they're going to, I mean, I was here when Mike Kane came in and pitched and said, we have both fire trucks in the city shop right now, neither one of them run. What do you guys at the body want to do? And I put up a stop. And so somebody had said, we need to make an emergency expenditures. Yeah. So I just, you know, this is not, this is, I think what Scott's saying, there's no sunset on this, so this is going to be, you know, a continuing issue.
So I
And if we're
think that-
spending the 126 on planning, then we should start doing that right.
we should do some numbers to see where we've been the last 15 years, how close we've come to that percentage. And then nothing like this possibility.
Well, we've always met the percentage as was passed, or else we would have been making the supplement.
I get that, but I mean, what I'm hearing from Mrs. Earl is we need to look at where we've been, where we are, and where we need to be, and we need to stop looking right here and do some long-term forecasting. And I mean, I get you're forecasting a couple years down the road, which is great, but I mean, I think we need to look at 10, 15, 25 years down the road.
And as staff, we're actually already doing that by developing a capital improvement plan now. So that's already being developed. Is there any further questions? Take a vote. You can.
I make a motion to approve
Thank you. That concludes our meeting.